20 years. 20 years I trained. I worked so hard. I excelled at everything. Best student Baron ever trained. And this is where they put me, Grevi complained, as she laboured over the stupid saw. It was hard, grueling work, and somehow even more repetitive than endurance training. But orders were orders. So here she was, outside the ruined keep, that was slowly being restored to life beam by beam. One dragon, trying to keep up with a 20-man work crew, who had just gotten told by the Inquisition that getting done by winter was no longer good enough. No, they had to give up what equipment and man-hours they could to go help build stuff at Bismarty Keep. She had sort of liked the folk at that little mound of rocks. They certainly threw a fine party, complete with Jarrex making a fool of himself. But having to work overtime just so they could get a stupid warehouse was pushing the goodwill at least a little in Grevi's mind. "Atta gal! At this pace we'll be starting on planks for the 6th story tomorrow," the amused voice of the stupid worker manning the saw called out. "Not that those need any less cutting, mind you." "I know. They need more," Grevi grumbled, rather short of breath, as she hauled away on the rope that drove the saw via the big geared pulley. She glanced towards the sleeping spot that she and her crew had prepared. She could really use a lie down right now, even if it would make her look like Jarrex, always lounging about, only doing what he had to. Her armor and combat harness were also laid out just in case they wanted it on in a hurry. She hadn't worn it in weeks, instead having been put in the crude working harness. It even smelled, probably after having been packed away wet. At least her armor kit would never be treated like that. Harrison and Felicia took good care of that. They'd even found the time in between the work to polish the platework. It shone in the sun, bright and alluring. The whole reason for her going down this path: to serve with honor and distinction, to make something of herself. And there it was, lying in the grass, while she sawed logs. "There better be something worthwhile at the end of all this," she sighed, thinking back to a happier time. She liked the training, as grueling as it was unfair. But the competition? The meaning behind it all? She had loved it. Flying formations, going for speed and endurance, combat training both in the air and on the ground. She never shied away from a wound or two. Her kind healed quick, and she knew she held the trump card on the ground. Her bite would kill anything. No matter its size, age, experience, or magic, her bite would put it down for good. And to getting close, she had her gas. Any crew would have to run or risk dying in seconds. Any dragon could not hope to remain there for long, coughing and spluttering all the while. Of course, she had never used it in training, or at least not on anyone. But she loved to remember that she had the final ace on the ground. Sure, a blue could outfly her, and certainly outrange her. A red was likely to be larger and stronger, and its fire could give her a very bad day, but it wouldn't stop her in her tracks. A white needed time to freeze her in place. They were often most dangerous than the wing. A good hit to a wing and you were doomed. Then there were the blacks. Tiguan. Older than both her and Jarrex, and too soft to match either. He was strong, and his acid worried her most of all weapons she might face. But his range was little more than her own, and she knew that. And they spent more time practicing killing blacks than anything else. Attack from above, let gravity pull the stream of acid down. Her crew carried soda to neutralize any glancing hits, but a well-trained black, who knew what they were doing, was the most dangerous thing she could think of if they got their way in how they would fight. But she had trained for that. Extensively. "Tiguan! It is no use pulling your punches before you are even halfway to hitting her," Yields pleaded, as the large black dragon got back up onto all fours with a pained grunt of effort. Grevi simply sat patiently and waited. She had done well. His defenses had been battered aside, as she had knocked him over onto his side with ease despite being a ton short in weight against him. "I know, but I don't want to hit her. Grevi is nice," Tiguan protested, eliciting a sigh that was not without compassion from Yiltz. "You think everyone here is nice? Do we really need to bring convicted criminals to the training fields just so you would take this seriously?" "I would suggest turning up the heat, but I'm afraid even that might not work," Second Lieutenant Sisu added, Grevi's ranking officer. She was a strict woman and a focused one. "That big old teddy bear might just turn and run." "No, I am not a coward. I would simply refuse to fight back likewise," Tiguan corrected, convincing as always. Grevi would absolutely have believed him, even if he had said it quivering with fear. The guy didn't talk much about his past, and he had definitely done his fair share of running, but a coward he was not. She would be more concerned with Jarrex on that account, or that fiery red Morena, although she would likely disobey orders to run headfirst into danger rather than away from it. "No one is calling you a coward, big fella, but you have to actually try or you won't learn anything. Grevi is quite capable of defending herself." Yiltz tried again, soft-spoken and kind as always. If Grevi had received the man, she would have been furious with such babying, but for Tiguan it was needed. "Could she wear her armor, perhaps? Then I could try to strike her on that instead." Tiguan tried hopefully, looking to Grevi's Second Lieutenant Sisu. "Absolutely not. We are not risking damaging such a valuable set of equipment for mere sparring practice. Your wounds will be tended to, and they will heal. I don't think a few thousand years of medical understanding are about to get uprooted today." "If it helps, I will not mind a scrape or two, but you will receive a few in exchange, of course," Grevi added, head held high and trying not to look smug. She was younger and smaller, yet she had the upper hand even without gas or venom against a black. If she could manage the same against Morena, she would be the finest close-quarter fighter in training. Then she just had to outsmart Jarrex in the air, and she could truly be the best student. "Okay. Promise not to get mad at me." "Of course. This is training," Grevi replied tactfully, bowing her head slightly. "Shall we try again? Properly this time." Tiguan didn't respond, instead just turning to face her once more. She had expected to see him rise onto his hind legs, tail and wings steadying him, ready to slash and bite. But as she rose, the black instead charged her headlong, seemingly uncaring as she instinctively brought her own claws down on his back before he slammed into her chest, sending her over backward. Her claws barely dug in along Tiguan's back, as the ground dragged her down under him, the black carrying on past her. She tried to kick him in the stomach but missed, legs sprouting high into the air fruitlessly, as she just stared in sheer shock and surprise. There was nothing standard about this. This wasn't doctrine or what they had learned. As she finally turned her head to look at Tiguan, all she saw was an open maw. She froze as it delicately and very gently closed over her head, before very quickly pulling back, revealing the delicate blue skies to her once more. Tiguan took a step back, almost more of a hop, turning his side to her like he was expecting retaliation. She could even see him ready to lift his wing to cover his face just in case, like a slave scared of the whip. "There, I did it. Can we stop now?" Both Grevi and Sisu were silent, staring at the black dragon. Yiltz, though, was there to save them once more. "Yes, I think so. Very well done. And you hardly put a scratch on her, though we might need to have those scratches on your back looked at." Tiguan didn't respond, instead just staring at Grevi, who was still laying on her back trying to figure out what just happened. He was always so sweet and gentle, a bit clumsy at times, but always careful in the extreme and apologetic when he did mess up. "You aren't mad?" he questioned, doubt clear in his voice as the two kept staring at each other. It took her a brief moment longer before she snapped out of it and shook her head. "No, of course not. This is just training. I will have to be faster on my feet next time," she tried, giving it her best to try and sound warm and happy like Yiltz did all the time, thinking that would help. Tiguan didn't look very convinced at all, taking another step back before glancing at Yiltz, who was already walking over. With a swift swing of his head and a turnabout face, the lieutenant was picked up, and the black dragon jogged away like he had been defeated, leaving Grevi staring once more. "I see someone forgot who here has actual fighting experience." Colonel Victoria Hershaw spoke up, having approached unnoticed. The appearance of the colonel had both Grevi and Sisu wheeling about in an instant, Sisu snapping to attention, while Grevi flung up dirt and grass to get back to a proper, respectful sitting position. Her posture was perfect as she stared dead ahead, awaiting the advice of their chief instructor, though the moment was rather ruined when a tuft of grass landed on her snout and had to be shaken off. "At ease, you two," Victoria relented, looking the two of them over, seeming unsure what to make of it all. "Tigran is no soldier, ma'am. What are you referring to?" Sisu spoke up first, mirroring Grevi's sentiment. "No, but he is a black dragon. Wherever he goes, trouble follows. I will spare you the details, and frankly, they aren't for your ears. But know this. Tigran earned his place here. Baron and I intend to train the best. We are no run-of-the-mill instructors. You both know this. Any old black who wandered in looking for food and a roof would not be training with us. Sure, we would find a use for them, but not here. Not this wing. Tigran has faced the odds many times before. He's either won or lived each time. In terms of experience, you are a whole life behind. Best get to work." Grevi groaned as she heaved, her long massive wings bending under the forces like bow limbs. They would hold, and she knew they would. There was nothing new about today. Everything by the book, trained, planned, and tested. She and Sisu had spent most of the evening and well into the night planning for today. Baron and Victoria would have them dueling one-on-one in the air. No weapons, no Jarek shouting, "Hit!" whenever he managed to vaguely point at them. She had so hoped she would get to wipe that smug grin off his face, but instead she got Marina, the red firecracker. Strong as could be and set on a hair trigger between slow lazy, sand potato, and murderous berserker. "Wait for it. She's not properly angry yet," Sisu called out from the saddle at the base of Grevi's neck. They were flying full armor, full crew, and with simulated suppliers today. There had to be at least 1.5 tons on her right now, but the same was true for Marina. The difference was the Red was a good 12 tons, and didn't have the money to fill proper armor. Sure, she had been given more weight in the nest to make up for it, but Grevi doubted it was enough to level it out between them. Grevi didn't respond to her lieutenant. She didn't have to, simply waving acknowledgement with one ear and saving her breath as she kept steady. She trained harder than any of them. She would stand the test of endurance. There was a prolonged turn fight far better. Marina had easily been baited into a turning fight, both dragons starting nearly opposite each other. Normally, only a far superior flyer would take such a fight, Blues being famously good at it. Marina likely believed that Grevi's armor would make her easy to catch, and while it was heavy, it was very well made. The plates were tempered steel, thinner than the lesser iron plates, and the skins underneath were brown bear, thick and comfortable. All her harnessing was Tyrox leather, triple stitched and with steel buckles rather than iron or brass. She could have wished for no greater gift. It had served her older sister well in her younger years, and now it would bring her victory at last. "She's beating to catch. Just keep steady and let her gain. We need every beat we can get out of her," Sisu called out, keeping an eye on their pursuer. "She's got the scent now. She's looking properly furious. Do it." Grevi knew her cue and didn't respond. She just tucked her wing and rolled over onto her back before pulling up sharply. The big heavy red followed, sweeping wide, and ending up further behind and below. Grevi put some speed back on, flying level, and throwing a quick glance behind her to check that Marina really was trying to catch them. Of course she was. The red beating after them with wings pumping like mad and smoke pouring from her nostrils, a look that could kill on her face. "Come back here, coward!" she roared out, wasting more precious breath, as Grevi put on more speed, looking to prolong the chase as much as possible. She was breathing steadily and efficiently, 1 breath per beat. She could go faster, but this was her most efficient fighting speed, a concept she doubted Marina had even grasped yet. She proceeded to lead the Red on a wild chase through the sky, using some of Jarex's tricks, even if she would never admit it openly. As the Red tired, it became easier and easier to evade her attempts to close the distance. Sisu and Grevi had some debate on when enough was enough before they finally went on the offensive. It had been a quick matter. Marina was fierce, but she wasn't stupid enough to not know when she had lost. She let Grevi sit down on her back for a moment as the Green declared victory and let the Red lose once more. Once back on the ground, she'd been expecting praise and congratulations. What she got was a "very good, though in the future wasting so much time does give the enemy plenty of opportunities to come up with a counter to your plan" from Victoria, though Baron at least was looking at her approvingly. This clearly rubbed Marina the wrong way, which did sweeten the deal even more so. That evening, she and her crew had celebrated, declaring, "Only Jarex left in the air now," as they toasted before turning in for the night. Grevi was relieved they hadn't gone on for long. Her chest was burning like fire the whole time, and her wings felt heavy like lead, not that she dared show it. Her crew had done very well. Nothing had given way, fallen off, or come undone. Not one hindrance in the air, aside from the added weight, which she simply had to deal with. Sisu had performed outstandingly, and the plan had been hers too to start with. She had already decided for herself that she would be asking to keep all 3 if at all possible. She needed them thanks to her armor, after all. Her graduation ceremony had been a bittersweet day. Her mother and father had come to see her, along with many of the people she knew from the orchard, but she also had to say goodbye. Jarex was going to the frontier at his father's request of all things. Tiguan was to be a liaison to the city guard at his own request, even if Grevi suspected it was Victoria and Yultz's idea. Marina would be staying at the training fields. She hadn't cut it, and, sad as it was, Grevi could see why. She was strong and brave, but reckless and stupid. Of course, it didn't help that she had gotten caught stealing food. But Grevi would have the strangest departure. She had been given leave as a reward due to finishing top of her class. She never did manage to beat Jarex in the air, the lazy bastard somehow managing to stay ahead of her, rather than give her a nice static target to aim for. Tiguan had also managed to fend her off, though she was confident she could win in a no-holds-barred fight now. He had taught her many of his tricks, but never where he had learned them. She did not probe. It was not her place. She had simply learned and improved. So here she sat, the finest student of this year's graduates from the capital training ground. Not a lesser one, like Cartagena or Bartelion. The capital. That made her the best of the crop this year for the whole kingdom. Precisely what she had been aiming for. Her request to keep her crew had also been granted, and they too had received leave. They had even been convinced to come back home with her, after a few days to say goodbye. They all 3 had their families in the capital, so it was only natural they would follow Grevi home. They had been able to see their families weekly for as long as they had been assigned to Grevi, after all. She had not. The look on her parents' faces as Victoria read aloud her accomplishments and let Grevi take her oath. It was nearly enough to break her stone-hard face. They looked so proud of her. She knew they feared for her safety, just like they did with her sister. But she was the best. Whatever the world threw at her, she would deal with it. "Come on, quit daydreaming. We have work to do." The now more annoyed-sounding man on the saw shouted out. "Can't be that damn hard to walk back and forth now, can it?" "Says the guy who's missing 2 fingers, Grevi grumbled, turning around and starting to walk back again, the saw picking up anew. She hated that sound. For weeks it had been running back and forth, sawing. There was nothing to do here, Nothing to learn, nothing to study, nothing to improve at. Just carry, haul, pull, and lift, until she was so exhausted she would rather sleep than train. At least it was good exercise, she grumbled reluctantly, thinking back to how much stronger Jarek's had been at the festival, as opposed to their graduation. She had honestly expected him to go lounge around at the Frontier Keep, eating on their bill and having his every need cared for by the dwellers. That was how it was supposed to be, after all. She would of course have spent the time training and practicing, but she doubted Jarek's would get much of that done, save when Zarko managed to get him into their air. But she had been proven wrong, which might be irritating her even more than the fact he had beaten her in a tug-of-war of all things. He had almost never beaten her on the ground before, and when he did, it had been pure luck, nothing else. He had still gotten lucky this time that she wasn't ready for his trick. She would get him again next time. Maybe she could even take on Tiguan, if she put her back into it right now. He was probably busy playing hide-and-seek with the kids at that other keep, Deriva or something. Oh yeah, I'll show those two goons who's still best. Whoa, shit, hold on now. Don't break it. This is where you live? Harrison had called out, the young man hanging over the side from the handles on the harness to get a better look. Look at all those trees. Are they all apples? Mostly, Grevi replied, sounding perhaps a little more cocky than she would have liked. Her parents' estate was vast, and they produced a lot of apples and some other fruits here. It was still the life of a farmer, though, toiling away in the fields, and they didn't have much in the way of hunting rights. So they spent a lot of money buying food from keeps and villages that hunted and ranched for meat, but the estate still looked impressive with its thousands of fruit trees. I always wanted to live in the countryside, not as cramped and stinky as the city is. Oh please, your family owns a nice enough business. You only set foot in a slum if you wanted to, Felicia interjected. The two crewmen often had some good-natured bickering going on. Grevi tended not to take part too much. That might come across as favoritism, after all, and there had never been the need to intervene, so she tolerated it. Well, yeah. I just wouldn't have minded some greenery outside my window, that's all. Guessing you got plenty of nice views travelling with your dad, didn't you? Trust me, it was not worth suffering the lectures and stories. Being a surveyor is not all it's cracked up to be. It's just constant politics and map work. Chin up. It made you a fine enough navigator. One day you'll make lieutenant to a dragon, I'm sure, Sisu added, as she too watched the trees below, soon making out the farm itself. There were advantages to being this far in and near a city. Land and food might be expensive, but one didn't hide behind stone walls every night. And certainly not once the 4 dragons that called the farm home were factored into any aspiring brigand's calculations. The farm buildings consisted of 3 large main houses, one for the workers who lived upon the premises year-round. 3 stories worth of bedrooms, kitchens and halls, and at least 3 times as long as it was wide. Then there was the Dragon Hold, as they so often called it, a large squat single-story building with a high roof. One may even mistake it for a barn or warehouse from a distance. Inside were only 6 rooms in total. Her parents' room, the largest of them all, was placed up against one gable, and able to fit 2 adult dragons quite comfortably. Then there was a common area for them all to mingle and eat together, when weather forced them under roof. Then followed 4 smaller rooms, Grevi's amongst them. They were still perfectly comfortable for her and her 2 other siblings. She had 2 younger brothers, twin brothers even. Not unheard of in dragons, but not exactly common either. The last building was the brewery. On its loft, the harvest would be stored as it came in, ready to be fed down into the massive boiling vats and then bottled, ready to ferment. In autumn, they would also sell the juice straight as it was. Getting a taste of the sweet liquid after every harvest was still one of Grevi's favourite times of the year, though it had now been at least 5, since last she had been home for it, even if her father had brought some fresh juice for her last year. Grevi came in for a gentle landing, flanked by her parents on either side. Today she held the place of honor as she descended into the courtyard created by the 3 buildings laid out in a half circle. Everyone was out and waiting to greet her. Her 2 brothers, the servants, the farmhands, their contingent of guards, of course, out on display, with armor polished and family standard held high. She felt pride swell in her chest as she looked around at them, her own armor glinting in the sun as she sat in front of them regally, head held high. She felt as much as heard her parents land to either side of her. Her father was the eldest. He would be the one to let them know how she had fared. The assembled crowd slowly quieted down, perhaps sensing that there was an announcement to be made. A few looked confused, perhaps believing she had somehow failed, which they evidently didn't believe possible. Her brothers were the last to quiet down as their father stepped forward, the 2 having taken turns to roar out in greeting. "Everyone, hear this. My daughter Grevi has not only passed her exams at the training grounds of our capital, under the decorated veteran Baron and his colonel Victoria Hashore, she finished top of her class, making her the finest student to graduate this year, possibly even this decade. Baron himself made it plain she is one of the best he has ever seen." If Grevi could look any prouder or happier, she did not know it. Even if she did have to give her father a slight, cockeyed glance for perhaps embellishing her achievements a little. Their dragonettes, though, erupted in cheers, and the look on her brothers' faces was worth it all. They were so proud of her too. She would fill the armor her sister had left empty. She would carry on the tradition. Their family had always had one of their number serve in the guard. Now it was her turn. "As such, celebrations are in order," her father continued. "Roll out the barrels and light the fires. Weather permitting, tonight will be a fine night." There had been drink and food and games. To her surprise, her parents had even invited some old friends from the guard. 2 had even served with her sister, though not on the fateful day. They had shared tales and legends as the drink flowed. Grevi was allowed to drink as much as she pleased for the first time she could remember in decades, yet she kept it light. Today was no day to make a fool of herself. The same could not be said for all, and her mother took to keeping good order, with a few of the farmhands being sent to bed against their wishes. "What of your classmates? Did they at least provide a decent challenge?" one of the veterans questioned as his mug was refilled. "More than enough. I still have not bested Jarrex in the skies, and Tiguan is fearsome on the ground. But Jarrex cannot brawl to save his life, and Tiguan took poorly to aerial maneuvers, so I won out on the whole," Grevi replied. "It pays to be well balanced, else you risk finding your weaknesses exploited in the field. I haven't been keeping tabs on the current crop much. I take it Jarrex is the young blue, Glira's son?" "Indeed, though he has not inherited his mother's temper," Grevi retorted, thinking back to her few encounters with the older blue. She struck her as lazy, much like Jarrex, but she was bloodthirsty, almost like one would expect of a red. She could say many unkind things about Jarrex, but bloodthirsty he was not. "What of this Tiguan fellow? The red I heard about, I take it?" "No, Tiguan is a black dragon," Grevi corrected politely. One figures the guard needs the numbers after all. Is he a good egg at least? Of a fine line, perhaps?" Grevi was silent for a moment as she pondered how to respond politely. The man didn't know, after all, and it was a common sentiment. "I do not believe I know of his line, but I can assure you he is a good egg. If I could find any fault with him, it would be that he is too kind, a touch soft, if you may." "Well, ain't that an interesting one? One could hope he's being spared from the worst the world has to offer then. I'm sure his parents are very proud of him too, having passed from such a prestigious teacher." "I am sure they are," Grevi lied. She didn't know much about his parents. He never spoke on the subject, but she could work out well enough that he was likely not celebrating with them tonight. In fact, after a few seconds of pondering, she had to admit she had no idea what the Black Dragon was doing tonight. He was to report to the city guard in a day or two, so she wasn't really sure. Maybe that Hershore lieutenant was treating him to something. Perhaps they were back at the Hershore mansion. Yeah, that was probably it. And she was betting Jarrex was back at the Traders Guild for some sort of party too. They had both earned it, unlike Marina. Once the evening had started to quiet down, Grevi had gotten up and excused herself. She had something she must do. Walking alone along the torchlit building of the Dragonhold, she entered and made her way to the now empty room. A quick flick of a claw undid the latch and the large heavy oaken door swung open on creaky hinges. Walking inside, her claws clacked on the stone floor, cold as ice, with this room no longer heated by the fires tended below. In front of her, glinting in the moonlight streaking from the open shutters, hung the armor her sister had worn the day she died. It was far larger than what Grevi herself was currently wearing. Her sister had just passed 18 tons when she had left for a routine patrol. Grevi crouched before the small shrine that had been built in front of the armor, staring at the painting of her lost sister at its center. They looked so much alike, so full of pride and happiness. Grevi's eyes twitched at the sound of small clacking claws, a robed figure emerging from the shadows under the open shutters. "Hello, Reja," Grevi rumbled, having rather hoped to be alone for this. Though if anyone was to be here, their lore master was as good as she could wish for. "Greetings. I knew you would come here," the old man replied. He produced a small box from under his robes as he turned his back to her, walking to the shrine with a slow, measured gait. "Please, allow me." A few flashes of sparks could be seen before a wick caught light. A soft orange glow radiated out from behind the man, spreading as one by one the candles on either side of the painting were lit, bathing her sister's armor in orange light from below. The vicious lines of the helmet cast long drawn-out shadows upon the wall and ceiling. "I will ensure you are not disturbed now," Reja continued, blowing out the wick before turning to make good on his promise, and walking out as quietly as one could manage. "Thank you," Grevi let out, as he passed her by, before closing her eyes, crouching low before the shrine and starting to pray. She prayed to Ishan to take care of her sister, and to take care of her as she should fall in her duty. She prayed to Tula for good fortune upon the battlefield. She prayed to Oleg that her armor might protect her, and she prayed to Lotek for safe travels to come. "Fear not, sister. I will carry on your spirit. The fight will not be in vain." "You damn well will if you don't quit daydreaming. Come on, quit just standing there. We have work to do." Grevi just let out a long sigh as she got back to the endless walking. One day I'll get to prove my mettle. It can't come soon enough.